Okay, come on, come on, come on. I'm gonna have to park one side of the county. Go.
Yeah.
Oh,
By the
yeah,
Yellow
they've never
House?
done anything.
Oh, I should have thought of that.
Good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you all, particularly our residents who have come here to listen and some to speak at today's county board meeting. It means a lot for all of us for you to join us. It shows your advocacy, your concern, and your interest in Kane County government. And I hope that that will continue as we move forward. Your voices are very critical to us, and we may disagree, but we will all always come to an agreement because we work together, and that is the nature of Kane County, and that is the nature of our board. So please welcome taking time out of this beautiful morning to join us. And with that, I'd like to call the meeting to order. It's slightly after 9:30, and it is Monday, October 24th, 2022. And I'd like to call to order the special meeting of the county board. Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Ellen? Ellen, present. Good morning.
Bates. It's here.
Okay, Berman,
Berman here.
Brown,
Brown here.
Davis,
Davis here.
Ford, Fraz, Gums. Hello, Ms. Gums? Can't hear you. Iqbal,
Iqbal present.
Kenyon,
In here.
Caius,
Caius present.
Copey. Mr. Copey. Leonard,
Leonard here.
Lewis. Lewis here. Martin,
Martin present.
Molina,
Molina present.
Sanchez,
Sanchez present.
Shepro.
Jeffro present.
Thank you. Silva,
Silva here.
Strathman. Ms. Strathman. Surgis, Tepe. Mr. Tepe. Wallace
Here.
and Winicky.
Present.
Oh,
We have a quorum.
very good. Thank you.
Surprised.
That way he wouldn't have to.
Ms. Winnicki, could you honor us with the pledge, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States and to the republic
For which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. There are no minutes to approve, so I'd like to go on to public comment. Just so you know, if you feel that the room is getting too crowded and you don't have a comfortable seat, we have the auditorium available for you downstairs where there will be live streaming and a little bit more room if you feel that that's what you would require. We have a number of speakers today, and I would hope that we all remain quite civil. And it is a matter of our protocol to have that happen. You will be allowed 3 minutes to speak. If it's off topic, 5 minutes on topic. And the only topic we are talking about today is property tax. So that's our only topic. And yes, I see your sign, ma'am, and I appreciate it. And it's a lovely sign indeed. So I will have, I'll be calling the speakers up in order, and please identify yourself and identify the city where you're from. And then you can proceed to speak, and we will have a timer. And I'm afraid I'm a little hardcore. I will stop you at 5 minutes or at 3 minutes, depending upon the topic that you're going to be presenting. So the very first speaker today is Mr. Jerome Bettig.
Thank you for having me here. You talk about allowing all the voices and we're gonna come to agreement. I highly doubt that.
Mr. Bettig, please, before we begin.
My name is Jerome Bettig. I'm from Wasco, Illinois, otherwise known as Campton Hill.
Okay, and are you speaking to topic or?
I'm on topic.
Thank you, sir.
You know, I have a question. We're talking about raising property taxes. And for all these people, I know Republicans are going to vote for it, the ones that are going to go off and retire. And there's Democrats are going to vote for it because they think it's a cool thing to do. I guess my comment is, who went and questioned a constituent and said, I got a great idea. We don't know how to spend money, but isn't this a great idea? We serve you, you're a constituent, but go ahead. We're going to raise your taxes so we can go ahead and figure it out the next time around. Or inversely, maybe there was a question that was asked and say, we are so brilliant at spending your money that we want more of it. No, I think it's a bunch of bullshit, quite honestly.
Sir,
And-
and please, be civil with your words, please. I know passion, but please.
You know what? You work at my discretion. I don't work at yours. I hired you. I pay taxes for you. And so at the end of the day, there are things that are going on. People are suffering. You guys don't know how to manage taxes. You don't know how to spend. The bulk of the money is going towards schools. And those are a mess. As an attorney, we've sued the school district so many times and won because we used to have a top 10 school district. They suck now. And you want more of our money. You really want more of our money. That's the bottom line. And so you think that you are smarter than us, but you are the ones who serve us. We hire you. And I really want to know what board member here has gone out and said to any of the constituents, I got a great idea. We're going to raise taxes and we're going to spend it on this stuff. It's bullshit.
The next speaker is Roxanne Shika.
My name is Roxanne Shilka. I live in Batavia and I will be speaking on taxes. Okay. So I'm here to speak to you about this foolish proposal to raise taxes yet again. And as I understand, it was scheduled to be voted upon after the election so that there would be more flexibility and less accountability. But let me remind you of your position. You are public servants who work for us, we the people. It's our money that you're spending. It's our lives that are being affected. And to the few brave board members who brought this scheme to life, I thank you. You are true public servants, not as my friend says, a public serpent. So if you have any awareness of what is going on, you would realize just how insane it is to raise taxes at this time. To quote James Carville, it's the economy, stupid. Do you realize that last month, Illinois took the honors of having the highest unemployment in the nation? We've been bleeding people and resources now for years due to high taxes, burdensome regulations, and corruption at all levels. Yet you want to raise more taxes. I say no. Do you realize that if you use the traditional calculation formula, the real inflation rate today is 14 to 16%, not 8.5%. Yet you want to raise taxes. I say no. Do you realize that with interest rates rising, real estate values are declining and the trickle down effect that has, yet you want to raise property taxes? I say no. Do you realize that Biden's prediction of a dark winter seems to be happening with the food processing plants mysteriously burning, supply chain disruptions and destruction of fertilizer manufacturing necessary for spring planting, yet you want to raise taxes? I say no. Do you realize that not only are food costs soaring, but energy costs as well, which touches every family in Kane County. Yet you want to raise taxes. You don't have a funding problem, you have a spending problem. You with one word before I close. No.
Thank you. Larry Beddock? Oh, Larry, I'm sorry, absolutely. Thank you. Debbie Dutkovich, did I say it properly? Wonderful.
My name is Debbie Dutkovich. I live in Sugar Grove.
If we can't hear you, pull it down a little.
My name is Debbie Dutkovich.
Dutkovich, could you spell your last name so we can get the spelling
E
right?
Kovich.
Thank you.
I live in Sugar Grove. And I'm going to speak on taxes. I've lived in Sugar Grove for 20 years, and in that time, my taxes have doubled. I had to take early retirement, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. It was right before COVID. I live in a 1,400 square townhome. I live in a 1,400 square foot townhome. My taxes are $5,000 a year. I've had to take a job as a cashier because of the present economy. My taxes now are approximately a bit less than a quarter of my salary. My health insurance is even more than that. So I have about a half of my income left to pay for my utilities, my food, and anything else. My water heater broke this month. I'm looking at probably higher gas bills. I've canceled Netflix. I look at my budget and I see what I can cut. Probably the only thing that I can cut next is my internet. Do I want to do that? No. But will I have to? I don't know. Will I be forced to move out of Illinois because of taxes? Possibly. It's here. My church is here. Do I want to do that? No. I want to ask you, what are you doing to reduce my tax burden? I'm looking. Any one of you look at your personal finances and do not look for waste. If you don't, then I don't think you're managing your finances well. I want you, as my elected officials who work for me and the other residents of this county, to look at this budget and cut the waste. Look at what you can do to ease the burden on your constituents, because we are suffering. I am not alone. And it's just a personal story. So on my answer on raising taxes, please, no. Thank you.
I believe the last name, so please forgive me if it's just the writing. Robert McGregor. Is that correct? Wonderful. Welcome.
Thank you very much for opening this to all of us.
Mike, please.
The mic, and we need your name in the city, please.
Okay, Bob McGregor. We live in Aurora. We're new to Kane County, but we've lived here for 20 years. And I thank you for your service. I'm glad that you started with the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. So that's a very important. You hear over and over again, and you know this, that we have some of the highest real estate taxes in the country. In my career, I served for 4 terms in the city council of a major city. I know what it is, how difficult it is sometimes to cut taxes when you have so many demands, but this is the time. We citizens cannot afford another increase. We've had to cut back. We're not taking a vacation this year because of this. Please do your best to cut our taxes, no raise. And I speak for many, many people, the groups that I belong to, they're all complaining about the high taxes. I know this is tough to do, but please do your best to cut our taxes. And we appreciate your service. Thank you.
Alan Eisberg.
Thank you for letting me speak. My name is Alan Eisberg. I'm from Elburn, Illinois. For 42 years, I served as a first responder between the cities of St. Charles and the St. Charles Fire Protection District and the Elburn and Elburn Countryside Fire Protection District and Elburn Ambulance Service District. Over those years, I learned as a first responder that my job.
Mr. Eisberg, I'm sorry to interrupt you. You're the city where you're from?
Elburn, Illinois.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. During my service, I understood that my responsibility was to these people here behind me. It was my job to serve them as best I could at all times, no matter what. And it cost funds for my family and much more comfortable, but it was a choice that I made. And I'm happy that I did make that. And I'm glad that you guys serve also in the manner that you do right now. What I would ask for you to do is to consider that these individuals here are attempting to survive many years after they have spent all of their energies here in the county of Kane to serve here, in the industries of the town, in the businesses in the county, and have never stopped. And they would love to live here till the end. So would I. But whether it happens or not, I'm hopeful that it will still continue. I've been on many boards, state and county and national boards. We always looked at how to make it work at the lowest cost. And that was our job, at the lowest cost. And I ask you to do the same thing.
Our last speaker will be Mike McCannon. McMahon, I'm sorry, McMahon, sorry.
I've listened to people, Mike McMahon, Elgin, Illinois.
Thank you.
Plato Township. Anyway, I've listened to a lot of folks out here, worried about the taxes, the spending. I'd like to ask the board here, what's your goal? When you pass a budget, you look at your budget, what is your goal? Do you have a goal, or is this like, we'll try this, we'll try that, and behind transparency? And what I see right now in the whole Democratic Party is you campaign on hiding behind things. This is ridiculous. I spent 30 years in the Chicago Fire Department. I watched us go from putting out fires to all these administrative positions that we didn't need. That's what I'm talking about when you don't look at your budgets effectively or efficiently. You end up going, we'll need this, we'll need that. Government just can't seem to stop growing. People can't afford this. You need to be transparent with that.
That concludes our speakers. So today we're going to be talking about 2 separate things. First of all, we're going to have a presentation, so everybody knows, from Mark Armstrong, who's going to be talking about why we're having this meeting. The meeting is going to be called because we have to get an understanding of what our estimated aggregate property tax levy amount will be, and that includes the new construction. During the last 10 years, Kane County's property tax levy has been flat. It has remained at 4%. Actually, I believe we're on the 12th year, but we can confirm for sure 10 years. So there has been no increase in Kane County's property tax since that time. Last year, my first year, there was no property tax increase. And this year, I believe, if I can sense what the board is going to be voting on, again, there will be no property tax increase. But what we have to do is to take a formal vote to make sure that that decision is going to be made. Because if we increase the tax rate to the CPI, which perhaps some of your other taxing bodies may be considering, we have to make sure that we have the opportunity to include the new growth, which will put us over that CPI of 5%. And that means we have to have a tax hearing. And this is the first time Kane County has had to address that in approximately 10 years. So so we don't belabor this because I know everyone has got a busy day ahead of them. I'd like to bring up Mr. Armstrong, who will be explaining to the board what this tax hearing would be about and what is a tax on new construction. Thank you, Mr. Armstrong.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me here today. My presentation that I'm going to be giving is strictly informational, and my intention here is to explain some of the math and some of the procedures. It is not and should not be considered an indication of what way you should go one way or another. That is beyond the bounds of my office. And this is not a recommendation on what you should do with the property tax levy. That's entirely within your office and definitely separated from my own. So this presentation is to describe the mechanical and legal boundaries of both the property tax extension limitation law and the truth in taxation law. Now, to start with the property tax extension limitation law, just quick show of hands. How many of you owned property here in Illinois in the 1980s? Okay, some of you remember all that back. I see some people behind me remember that. Back in the 1980s, we had come out of the recession. It came out of the late 70s. We saw our interest rates decline from a high of 17% down to what was then a low of around 10%. And we saw property values increasing at exponential rates. 20% a year, 20% a year, 20% a year. And at that time, Illinois' property tax system was largely a rate-based percentage or system. There were rate percentages that were caps on what could be done. And what a number of taxing bodies did was they let that tax rate percentage ride. So if property values went up 20%, they said, well, we're just going to go ahead and take 20% more tax dollars. Tax bills would rise 20%. But our statement would be, well, that's not our fault. That's those assessors. They're the ones who raised your assessment. Therefore, your tax bill went up by 20%. Meanwhile, they were taking 20% more money. The general public complained about that to the General Assembly. The contention was just because our properties have increased by value and 20% does not mean it costs 20% more to educate children, fight fires, plow streets, and so on. The General Assembly said, you know what, we think you're right. So we're going to pass this law, the property tax extension limitation law, that is generally going to limit property tax increases to the rate of inflation or 5%, whichever is less. Now, that law is not statewide. When it was first enacted in 1991, it was applied only to the collar counties, Lake, McHenry, Kane, DuPage, and Will. In 1994, Cook County was added. And since then, there have been other counties that could add it by referendum. If you look at the map that shows the northern half of the state, you can see those with the spots on it. Those are the counties and dates that have adopted PTEL by referendum. And the ones with kind of a a light reddish haze over them are the ones that had a referendum but did not adopt PTEL. Currently, 33 additional counties have adopted it by referendum. Statewide, 10 have rejected it, and 53 counties have never had a referendum or had it imposed on them. So let's look at what it actually does. The first thing it does, I mentioned earlier, it limits tax extension increases to inflation with a 5% cap on that. So what does that mean practically? Starting at 2015 and moving forward, you can see the actual inflation and the actual inflation factors. And this is based on CPIU. This is the Consumer Price Index for urban wage earners. There are a variety of different CPI ones, but this is the one referred to in the property tax code. And you can see the lowest level was in 2015 with 0.7%. The highest level in 2019, 2.3%. Now, these are the maximums the increase could be. In 2021, for the first time ever, since this law was put into place, inflation was higher than 5%. So that circuit breaker was put on it. So the inflation factor only is 5%, not 7%. So this is based on 2021 data. This would be for the levy year. We're currently in 2022, and this would be for the taxes paid in 2023. Now, there are some exceptions to the property tax extension limitation law. Home rule units don't have to abide by the PTEL. That would be municipalities of more than 25,000 population, municipalities adopting home rule by referenda, counties who have adopted an executive form of government have the option to do that. Only Will and Champaign have that form of government, and neither one of them adopted this. And of course, Cook County is exempt from that. So what are some of the other exceptions? Certain types of bonded indebtedness can be exempt from PTEL. Increases by referenda, referendums out to the voters, are exempt. Recapture of appeal reductions, that's something new that was added a couple of years ago. And new property. We're going to talk about new property in a little more detail in just a moment. Now, PTEL is not the first law that had the intersection of these public hearings and public meetings regarding property tax. There's a law about 10 years older than that called the Truth in Taxation Law. Now, the Truth in Taxation Law was enacted in 1981, and it requires notice of certain changes in extension, but it does not actually limit them. So think of it this way. PTEL requires permission to go over a certain amount. The Truth in Taxation Law only requires notice. It requires notice specifically if the proposed aggregate levy exceeds 105% of the prior year levy. And Truth in Taxation does not provide exceptions for increases to new property. So sometimes there's a little bit of confusion because 5% is a threshold mentioned in both laws. The two are actually unrelated. But we've mentioned new property now twice. So what exactly does new property mean in this context? Well, PTEL defines it to include a few things. The first things is it means new improvements. Think new buildings. Also, additions to buildings that add taxable value are considered new property. Property that was exempt from taxation in a prior year, but have now been added back into the tax rolls are considered new property. Lastly, something that doesn't really apply here, but maybe in the southern part of the state, any increase in assessed value due to oil or gas production from hydraulic fracturing. We don't have any oil or gas production in Kane, and we certainly don't have any hydraulic fracturing here. So with those standards, what is the mechanics of applying this? Well, what it's always going to start with is the prior year rate setting value and the prior year property tax extension. Now, the numbers I'm showing you here are realistic in that they are comparable to the numbers in the Kane County budget, but they are not the actual numbers. I don't want to confuse anyone into thinking that what I'm showing here is what's being proposed or not proposed. It is simply a mathematical example. So the first thing we're going to look at is what was last year's tax rate. And that is you take the prior year property tax extension What is an extension? An extension is the actual levy after it has been adjusted if necessary by the county clerk. So you pass the levy, the extension is once the clerk gets hold of it. The rate setting value is the assessed value of property minus exemptions and a few other things. For instance, when there's the provision in the preferential assessment statute that allows golf courses to have a really low assessed value, even though they're worth more than that and they're taxed low and everybody else pays a little more, so golf courses can pay less. That goes lower into that prior year rate setting value. So what you get with that extension divided by that rate setting value is a rate of 0.356250. So here's how the math works. Extension divided by rate setting value equals rate. So next we're going to take a look then at the inflation factor. The inflation factor would set a maximum that can be done without any of those exceptions. Our current inflation factor is 5%. So that would limit the current maximum tax extension before new property to $59,850,000 in this example. Again, the math, prior year extension times the inflation factor equals the current year maximum. So from there, how would you develop a levy under PTEL? What would be the maximum going on top of that? You'd have to look at the current year rate or current year rate setting value, again, before new property. Now, what I'm showing here is an increase of 5.88%. That is the actual increase in Kane County rate setting value before changes by Board of Review and a few other minor changes as done through our sales ratio studies. So looking at that, we would look at an increase of 5.88%. That would mean the current year maximum tax rate would be 0.353289. Again, the math, extension divided by rate setting value equals rate. Now, one thing I want you to take a notice of this is the current maximum tax rate under this is actually a lower tax rate than before. So what that leads some to believe is, well, if the rate is lower, we're actually lowering taxes. What I would encourage you to look at is the actual dollars in extensions, because if property values are increasing, that's going to make a difference in this calculation too. If you had no change in the prior year extension, the rate would drop even lower. So looking forward into that, you're looking at that current maximum extension of $59,850, the current rate setting value of $16.9 billion, and that current maximum rate before new property is added of 0.353289%. Now we're looking at new property, and I'm using an estimate which is not unrealistic of about $150 million of assessable new property. That collected would be to apply the tax rate onto that amount. So it'd be the 3.53 or 0.353289% times 150 million would give you a new property extension of $530,384. Again, the math here, new property times new tax rate equals the new property extension. So that would give us a total rate setting value of a little over $17 billion for this example. And doing that is just adding the before new property plus the new property gives you that rate setting value. That would also increase the current maximum tax extension to $60,380,384. Again, the math, the before new property plus new property is the total extension. So is a truth in taxation hearing required under this example? Well, if you look at this, the prior year extension at 57 million, the current maximum tax extension at 60 million. If that were done and taken all the way out, that would require a truth in taxation hearing because the change would be 5.93%, which is greater than the 5% amount. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions on the math on this process.
Thank you, sir, and I appreciate that, but only the board can speak at this point. But certainly you can address those questions after the meeting. Uh, um, uh, Thank you, sir. Mr. Surges will be able to address those questions. Are there any questions from the board on this? Yes, Mr. Shepro.
Mark, when you.
Microphone, please.
That, that working? Does see it. All right, there we go. In the beginning of your presentation, you were talking about what led to PTEL. We all speak in alphabet soup here. The property tax limitation, and you mentioned the rate. It's correct, is it not, that by statute, every taxing body has a maximum tax rate that can be charged?
Yes, although that can be modified depending on whether the rates are hard caps or soft caps. Let me explain what I mean by the difference.
Well, I'm. It's unusual for me to say, don't give the full explanation. I have a feeling that some people in the audience probably aren't gonna want to hear that. I guess the point I wanted to make is that when before PTEL, one of the reasons, as you point out, why the taxes went up is a taxing body could say, we didn't change the rate. Whatever our rate was last year, we charged it again this year. It's too bad your house doubled in value, because if we take the same rate and your house doubles, your taxes will double. But of course, the taxing body could say, we didn't change the rate. After PTEL, you have a situation, as you pointed out, where the rate is a plug number at the end. Your example where you could have more taxes levied, but the rate would go down, I think illustrates that. So I guess my question is for you is, what is the maximum rate that a county could charge?
For county governments, because the rates are soft cap means they can be changed by referendum. PTEL essentially becomes the limiting rate. If the rate is hard capped, which means they cannot be raised by referendum, then those rates are set by statute, but they're generally set by fund, not by unit of government. For instance, there would be one rate for roads and bridges, another rate for a general fund. Rates, for instance, for IMRF are generally not capped, but they would be brought into the aggregate levy.
And if you can just, I'm sorry, acronym, the IMRF is,
Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund.
thank you.
So if this board were to decide that it wanted to exceed the 5%, we're not talking about the need to have a hearing, but whether or not you could legally, if you had a hearing, whether you could raise it. If you wanted to do more than the 5%, that could only be done by a referendum. Is that
More than the 5%, assuming no new property, more than 5% would require a referendum, with the exception of those things that I pointed out before, certain bonded indebtedness. New property is obviously one of the exceptions that's in state law, or if it was a home rule county.
okay? We are not a home rule county.
Kane is not a home rule county.
Now, if in the past, if you levied more than was allowed, my understanding is that then there would be a pro rata reduction before the tax bills went out.
That's correct. Theoretically, a local government could double their levy in any given year, but that's where the difference between levy and extension comes in. When the county clerk gets that extension, the county clerk will automatically reduce it to the amount that makes it a lawful extension. So if say a county board or a municipal board or city council was going to increase their amount way over it, they could do that, but it would automatically be cut down. That was common practice prior to the Great Recession. Very few local governments didn't raise their rates or their levies by a very large amount, making sure that they would take into account all new growth, because at that time, new growth was a generally unknown number. In the 16 years since I've been in office, we've moved the assessment process up, so we no longer are waiting until December or January to find last year's new growth. And now those numbers are very well known going into this process. So there's no more need to do those kinds of levying large amounts just to have them cut down at the tax extender's office.
Okay, last question. We've talked about the new growth, and my understanding of what that means in simple terms is that if you increase the levy by the amount of the new growth, in theory, if everybody's assessment stays the same, you don't pay any more taxes. But if you didn't take the new growth, everybody's taxes would go down.
That's a reasonable way of looking at it. If no property value changed from one year to the next, that makes the math a little bit easier. And you had no new growth, and the county then levied the same amount, and all the other taxing bodies levied the same amount, the tax bills would be identical because none of the math would have changed from one year to the next. Now, when new growth happens, assuming all those other variables are remaining the same as they were in the before example, what would happen is you would have new property to spread that tax burden over. That would the same amount would come into local governments, but the share each taxpayer pays, except for the new property, of course, is going to be a little bit less. A good example was when the outlet mall came on to the tax rolls when the TIF district expired. There was about $90 million of new growth going into local governments there. And local governments could decide whether they wanted to take new property, in other words, extend the existing amounts of levy over to that and raise more money, or give everybody a tax break. Every local government has to make that choice.
There's a cue for Madam Chair to remind people that TIF stands for Tax Increment Finance,
Correct. And
which is a,
did you have everybody here? That's tax increment financing at TIF district.
That's probably a whole nother PowerPoint.
That's a whole different conversation that we don't want to dive into.
thank you, Mr. Armstrong.
Thank you.
You're
Thank you,
welcome.
sir. Are there any other questions?
Madam Chair,
Mr. Iqbal?
I see that pie chart over there. If Mark could explain it to us, what it means and what is our share out of that pie.
Well, if somebody probably needs to point at it and do the Vanna White thing. But what this is the amount of
Celeste will
tax
do it.
extensions that came in and were extended onto tax bills through the Kane County Clerk's office and then sent out in bills from the treasurer in the 2021 payable 2022 year. So looking at the largest part, and I realize that looks a lot like a Pac-Man gobbling up things. The large part of that is schools, 68.3%. What that means is 68.3% of all taxes levied went to either your local unit school district or went to the community college district. The next part, the orange line there, goes to cities. And that looks like from here about 10.3%. The next part went to your parks and forest preserves. So this is the open space recreation type of dollars spent. That's about 5.5%. The purple slice after that goes to Kane County government itself. That's what this body is going to control. That's about 4% of that bill. You see libraries after that at about 3.5%. Fire districts after that, about 3.3%. just noting in passing that if a firefighting is done through a municipality, that would be in that orange slice, like in St. Charles and Geneva and Batavia. But say in Campton Hills, that's done by fire protection districts. So that would be down in the lower green slices. Township government and township road districts are at the 2.6%. And the last slice at 2.5% are other minor districts. The largest share of that goes to TIF districts throughout the county. There are 30 some of them, all controlled by municipalities. The remainder of that goes into small districts like cemetery districts, mosquito abatement districts, and things such as that. That answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I have one question just for explanation and clarity. As in the example in your slide, the prior year rate setting value was $16 billion. Now that's $16 billion that is collected hypothetically here in Kane County,
Not collected. That's the taxable value.
the taxable value.
That's right.
So the $1 billion+ that is collected, I believe, actual cash collected, total cash, is then distributed equitably onto this pie chart. Is that correct?
Correct. It's the money that comes in through the Kane County Treasurer's Office is collected and almost immediately distributed upon coming into the various taxing bodies that are shown up there in aggregate on the chart.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Shipper.
Clarify though, that amount that comes in is determined by each individual taxing body, how much they want to ask for.
That's correct. Although I would probably not use the term ask for because that implies that other people could say no. Levies are simply, this is how much we're going to spend and this is how much we're going to send.
They ask the clerk to extend and the treasurer to
That,
collect.
yes, that's an ask. And then the clerk, unless they exceed one of the minimums, maximus, for instance, if they exceed the requirements of PTEL, the clerk is required to cut that down. If it exceeds 5%, but a truth and taxation hearing has not been held, the clerk is required to cut that down. The clerk's job is to make sure all those steps were taken when the levy was set. And then the extension is the levy less any portion that exceeds what each group was allowed legally to have.
I guess my point was, or my question is, Ken Shepro, by the way, I'm supposed to say who I am, is that each taxing body makes an independent decision as to what they want to levy and extract, we could use that word, from the taxpayers. And it is independent of what other taxing bodies do. So for example, this county board has nothing to say about what a school district chooses to do with the amount of money that they put into their levy and vice versa.
That's correct. If you go to the clerk's website, there's a tax extension section. And each year there's something you can see. It says tax extension detail report. You can see in great detail what each taxing body in the county has had extended. And you can compare those going back, I think, all the way to 2004. We've been putting, ever since we acquired the DevNet system for managing our county's property tax administration, the clerk has been putting those reports out. I think we're the only county that does that. I haven't seen that kind of detail in any other county, but it's actually pretty easy to determine what every individual taxing body has done. What I typically counsel people do, talk to me about their taxes and look at their tax bill, is they'll say, with I think some justice, it's hard to go to all of those meetings. They see all those lists on the tax bill. So I encourage them to pick out the top ones. You know, if your mosquito abatement district is charging you $1, it's probably not going to be, you're not going to make that $1 back by going to those meetings. So it's typically going to be anything above, say, 5% of the total. That's mostly going to look at, for individuals, going to be schools. It's going to be municipalities. Sometimes it'll get into a couple of other districts. If you go to the clerk's website, they'll be able to tell you where to get in contact with all of those. It's always okay to ask questions, and we encourage that.
And I have one other question, and this is in response to what I've learned from our taxpayers. There has been a conversation that Kane County is able to levy over a 3-year period, 15% tax increase. I understand that that is not possible.
Well, theoretically, if you're going to, let's say inflation stays high and the inflation cap then becomes, the inflation factor in the PTEL calculation becomes 5%. Theoretically, that could get you up to a little bit over 15% because of compounding, but it's not something that could be done today. You would have to make this, you would have to make the maximum amount today, and then you would have to continue that in 2 successive meetings.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Sturgis.
Burgess. Mark, if in your slides, and I'm so many times we run through the numbers and then you get home this afternoon and you try and repeat it and then you have all these great questions. But on the 5%, are you suggesting that that 5% is automatic and it's not up for debate, that gets thrown in? Or are you suggesting that that's the maximum amount if we as a body choose to do that?
The latter. There's actually no automatic. If this board chose to do nothing, your levy would be $0. And there would be no tax extension onto the bills in the year coming up. Now, that probably has some other pertinent issues that it regards the county's ability to actually fund things. So that all has to be taken into consideration, but there is no automatic. All those are maximum amounts that the word limitation is used correctly. It's a limitation on what your levy would be. That's not the starting point. The starting point is wherever you guys think it should be.
So theoretically, I mean, just to elaborate, theoretically, we could say we don't want to raise that, or we could take an increment less than the 5%.
Absolutely. You
Thank
could,
you.
you could cut the levy in half if you wanted to. Now, there are other things that you want to make sure you're taking into consideration, but theoretically, you can do what you want. This is a policy-making body, and that's where the decision lies.
And I didn't miss that comment, Mr. Shepro. I didn't not hear that. You could actually reduce that if you wanted.
You could.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
You could bring it down to absolutely no taxes. I see that as well. And no taxes, with your applause, and I'll recognize Ms. Bates, has its own costs. Ms. Bates.
No taxes, no services. Mavis Bates. So if we should raise the taxes, if someday this body raised our taxes by 5%, does that raise my property taxes by 5%?
What it's going to do is increase the county's extension by that amount. So the extension of the 5% first of all, is applied just to the county's amount. The school districts get to make their own decision. The municipalities make their own decision, and et cetera. Now, how that's going to affect individual tax bills depends on a few other things. For example, what changes have happened to other property values in your area? What changes have been happening to exemption laws? For instance, there is a relatively new exemption law that allows significant exemptions to veterans with disabilities. And I haven't heard anybody say that's not a good thing. Now, in Kane County, it is probably a very limited effect of what it has on our tax rate, although it does reduce the overall burden, thereby driving up the rate. There's at least one district near Scott Air Force Base in St. Clair County where their taxable value has been decreased because of this by a significant amount. And that's caused them to have to reduce what they can actually pay because they're not a PTEL county. So they're up against those rate limits that Mr. Shepro has mentioned. And so now they're actually lowering the amounts going in because they're at their rate maximum, while individual tax bills actually are going higher. So there's a lot of moving parts here. The example I gave was one that just has a few of them. There's a lot more of them to go. So there is not a 1-to-1 ratio for what happens with the levy and what happens with your tax bills. There's more that goes on with that.
Ms. Bates.
Follow up, Bates again. So because we are only 4% of the total pie here, just hypothetically, for the folks in the crowd, if we were to raise our taxes by 5%, that would be a tax increase on my tax bill of approximately 0.2%, because we are a small piece of the pie.
It certainly could be. What would happen on the whole tax bill would depend on what all those other taxing bodies would do as well.
Okay, the other taxing bodies.
Yes.
All right. No other
Right,
questions?
one more
Everybody's
time.
fine? Last question, please.
I think what Ms. Bates is saying, or as I understand it, let's say your tax bill is $100,
Good, okay.
okay, which would be good, but not likely. But so if the county is 4% of that and nobody else changed their levy, and the county doubled its levy from 4% to 8%, your tax bill would go from $100 to $108 more.
Oh,
No,
no,
no.
you've got to multiply that by 0.04.
No.
Okay,
I'm saying if they doubled it. Okay, right now it's $4. So if
but
you
not the
double it,
total tax.
It's not the total
no,
taxes.
if you doubled it, it would be 200.
Well, go on, please.
Never mind. I
I think,
this is a fool's errand.
I think Mr. Armstrong will put into his calculator.
That's why I put all the calculations up for the math.
Yes, no, and the math, I think we all understand that when you do the assessments, it is a very complicated matter. It's very thoughtful and is done with great care.
It is. I just mentioned to everyone here, the assessment process is completely independent of the spending process. If there was no spending, it wouldn't matter what your assessment would be for your tax bill.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Just, Madam Chair,
Yes, Mr. Iqbal.
just to follow up on Mr. Shepro's example, Mr. Armstrong is gone, so I can't say that. If the total, my property bill is $10,000, the county would get 4% of that, that would be 400.
That's correct.
And so we have to live within that 400.
You do. Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So if we add 5% to that, it will add my tax bill by $20. Is that?
Yes,
Correct.
thank you.
That's correct. That is correct. That is correct.
Good.
So your contribution would be to Kane County $420 rather than the $400.
400, okay. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, Mr. Wallace.
Todd Wallace. I'd just like to make a short comment. Ever since the days that I previously served on the township board, and one of the arguments that never made much sense to me was someone saying that, well, it's such a small tax increase. It really doesn't matter. But we're in a position here at the county where we need to be leaders for the rest of these taxing bodies. And just doing something because it doesn't matter, it's not much, it's not a big tax increase. I don't get relying on that type of a principle. I think that we really need to take a hardline approach at this. Really, and I would like to get more into the discussion of why we're actually here, what the underlying cause is. And I'll reserve that for further into the discussion. Thank you.
Okay, very good. So before we go on to Mr. Onsik's presentation, I'd like to remind this group of individuals who are here, as well as anybody who may be listening, that although the senior tax exemption freeze sign up is passed for this year, if you make under $55,000 a year, your tax will be frozen at that time, and every time you have to renew it. And then we see a lot of people here of a certain age. So please make sure that you do take a look at that and take advantage of that, because that will permanently freeze on an annual basis your total tax levy. It'll be capped at 2022 or 2023. So that is something you can do. Mr. Armstrong's office, who you had a chance to see, can certainly help you with that. And that's also available online. So if you have a neighbor or a relative who fits that criteria, please advise them and try to help them out with that.
Has to be renewed annually.
It does have to be renewed annually to show proof of your income, which should be pretty easy to do because you have your taxes, your IRS tax, not our tax. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about is I'd like to bring Mr. Onzik up, who's going to be presenting, which may address Mr. Wallace's thought about why we're here.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I just wanted to give you an update since my last presentation. In my last presentation, just for presentation purposes, I had included a 3% union wage increase into the budget, but that was removed and it's not included in the draft budget at this point. The estimate of new construction was updated to reflect the most recent estimate that's available from the county clerk's tax extension department. So that has increased by $16,000. We had started out at 500,000, but according to the updated estimate, it's now at 516,000. So that's additional tax revenue that's included in the budget. Per the direction of the Special Finance Committee, the 5% property tax increase is included in this version of the draft budget, and that decreases the deficit by almost $2.5 million. There was an adjustment that we do behind the scenes for uncollectible property tax. It's at 0.4%. And so that adjustment was $10,735. So I'm just pointing these like fine details out to you so you understand why the deficit changed that was presented at the last meeting by the amount it did. And so the net result of that change is $3.6 million. And so this is just the detail that went behind calculating the 5% property tax increase that's included in the budget at this point. And we're taking the prior year tax extension amounts for each of the funds for which taxes are levied. So this is taking prior year tax extension, multiplying times 5%. And that group of funds at the top half is what will all contribute to the increase that's going into the general fund of that $2,490,000. And then the other individual funds have their own share of the increases, which would be the county highway, county bridge, county highway matching, and the county health department. So that's the detail behind what's included in the draft budget now as far as the 5% property tax increase.
And Mr. Onzik, the 5% that's in this proposed hypothetical budget, draft budget, was the recommendation that came from the Finance Committee of the 5%. So that's where this number is coming from. It was a recommendation from the Finance Committee to this. The reason why we're here is because of having to have the timely matter of whether or not we're going to be passing a 5% or not, which is decided here. If we're going to have the 5%, as we just realized, we have to have the fair tax meeting, and that has to be addressed within 20 days. That's what Mr. Armstrong's presentation was about. So if this is not accepted at the 5%, that special hearing will not be necessary.
Parliamentary inquiry.
Yeah.
I don't recall the Finance Committee voting in favor of a 5% tax increase.
This
Did I
was a
miss something?
special finance committee meeting that took place. That's where I was given the direction
did.
to put this in the draft budget.
Sir, you were at that meeting.
I was at that meeting. That's why I'm shocked to hear that.
Dronzig,
Yes, sir.
is Mr. Dronzig completed his,
No, I still have more.
A little bit more.
Almost done. Okay, so this is the summary then of what the current draft budget looks like. I've broken out the revenue line items. So if you look at that yellow column, you'll see it's 100 and almost $7 million of other revenue. It includes a property tax increase of almost $2.5 million, and then a use of reserves of $13.8 million. So what the purpose has been said for this meeting is whether or not to continue with the 5% property tax increase included, or to remove the 5% property tax increase. And then this shows you those two options. So if you were to include it, it reduces the deficit down to 13.8 million, which means that's the amount of reserves that would need to be drawn down. If you remove the 5% property tax increase, the deficit is at the $16.3 million level. So that is the total amount of reserves that would be drawn down. And then this tells you what would be the resulting balances in the reserves. So if you keep the 5% property tax increase, you would be left with $15.2 million in the reserves. If you remove the 5% property tax increase, you'll be left with the $12.7 million in reserves. And then we have the two different property tax levy calculations here. This is the one that includes the 5% increase. So that second column in red bold font, just about right in the middle of the presentation, that's showing you the amount of the property tax increase that would be added to the tax levy. And that's where that $2,490,000 is being added to the general fund levy. And then you have the other individual items for a total of $2.8 million increase. And then as we do every year, since we have been including new construction, we start with an estimate. In this case, it's $516,000. $516,000, but we add an additional amount to the levy. In this case, it's $50,000, in order so that by the time the taxes are extended and we know the exact amount of what the new property value is, we are then able to capture any of that additional amount, because normally there's more than what we estimate. And then like in the past year, it was $9,000 more. The year from that, I think it was $14,000 more. So by levying or authorizing a levy of a greater amount than what's currently estimated, and then authorizing me to reduce this to the exact amount of the levy, we end up with the exact amount of tax levy to cover new construction. And all of that language that authorizes that reduction from this additional $50,000 is included as part of the tax levy resolution. So this is just to explain why there's that $50,000 extra in there. It's to capture anything more than what is estimated for new construction. And then this is the amount of the levy if you were to pull out the $2.5 million tax increase from the general fund. And so this is the total levy in the right-hand column of 57.7. So again, if you include it, the total tax levy is $60,590,112. If you exclude it, it's $57,731,859,000. So those are the two total levy amounts that we have to choose from at this point. And then I only added this just for clarity and absolute transparency. If you were to pull out the 2.5% property tax increase from the draft budget, these are all the line items that would have to change. And it's basically on these two slides. So I just want to provide that for reference.
Thank you, Mr. Honsick. As always, well done. Are there any questions on this? Yes, Mr. Berman, please.
Berman here. You know, as chairman of the finance committee, I think we've had ample time to discuss our 2023 draft budget. And I propose a motion, and that motion is going to include option 2 that removes the property tax increase of 5%. And it does draw down our reserve by $322,405 to balance our budget of $123,162,000. So my motion is this. I move to set the estimated aggregate property tax levy amount for fiscal year 2023 pursuant to 35 ILCS 200/18-60, in which an amount of 57,731 57 million
Those numbers, please.
$57,731,859, which includes an estimated increase of 566,000 over the prior year aggregate property tax levy, corresponding to an estimated maximum increase in rate setting EAV attributed to new construction. I further move that the executive finance director is directed to prepare a revised draft budget reflecting the same.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Bates, second.
No.
Mr. Leonard, did you want to second that?
You know, I just wanted a little bit more clarification. I think what Mr. Berman is saying is he's proposing a budget without the property tax levy increase.
True.
And if that's the resolution, then I second that.
Thank you. So we have 2 seconds. Thank you. Thank you both.
In parliamentary inquiry.
Yes.
Okay, as it was just said, it is proposing an increase in the levy by only the amount of the estimated new growth. And I believe Mr. Berman said 566 was the number I wrote down.
566.
Mr. Onzik's number just a few moments ago was that he had revised it to 516. And my question is, was it the intention to be that number or to be the higher number?
I think
Whichever Mr. Onzek.
that's
feels it
Mr.
should be.
Onsick.
The 566,000 is taking the estimate of the 516,000 that's included in the budget for budgeting purposes and adding the additional 50,000. So it's a total tax levy of 566,000, so that would enable us to capture the full amount of new construction that would be calculated in February or March at the time of the extension is done.
So
And
566.
if the new growth is less than that, then there would be a reduction.
Yes, there is a language within the resolution for the tax levy that requires the levy to be reduced down to the exact amount of new construction.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Very good.
Call for a question.
I think we should call the question.
Yeah, Madam Chair, just want a clarification. We have a deficit of $16.1 million. Would the entire deficit be drawn from the reserve fund and no property tax?
Yes.
That's correct. That's correct.
$16,322. $16,322,405
Yes.
taken out of reserves.
Okay, thank you.
Sanchez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to make a comment because, you know, when I speak to constituents, I like to tell them how nonpartisan it is here at the county board, and I still feel that way. But during this election cycle, it does seem some of our actions become politicized in a way that becomes unnecessarily partisan. One of those issues being the taxes and the budget, which is the cause for us to be here today. Now, I'm seeing that this proposal is being sold, and I'm hearing that it's also being sold as a Democratic tax increase proposal. And as we heard just a moment ago, that's false. This was proposed by the Finance Committee, and I believe actually it was a Republican member that insisted we put this into what Mr. Onzik presented. So it is not a Democratic tax proposal. This is something that our chief financial officer, the one who is the expert in government financing, brings it to us almost every year during the budget process as an option, not a suggestion of what we should do, simply as here's something you could do in order to close this budget gap. So it's a neutral proposal. It's not Democratic or Republican. There are 3 Republican members on the Finance Committee, and they were involved in this process as well. So at this point, we have something that we are, I think, pretty all well in agreement that we are going to move in this direction. I made calls this weekend. I made sure to talk to every single Democratic member of the board in particular, encouraging to vote no, because I believe at this time it is not the right move. It's not the right thing to do. And I'm pretty sure I changed some votes actually. So I'm happy for that, because we have other problems to take care of. And this is one that I think we're all in lockstep on. For those members of this board and others who may have fortune in the election and want no taxes, members of the public want no taxes ever, no tax increase ever. To those members, I say during the budget season, please show up early. Do not wait until the last minute to say we need to start looking at cuts. We need to figure out what to do. We're using reserve money, which is against our own financial policies. If Mr. Onzik as a staff member violates our internal policies, he is reprimanded. We, on the other hand, don't have that luxury. I say that sarcastically. We get to do what we want essentially, but our policies state don't use reserves. We're going to, but we do have to figure out, once those reserves are gone, what do we do? And we need to have that conversation very seriously starting next year. Because if we're going to make cuts, we have to be very intelligent and very transparent in how we do that. So
Call
that's
the
it.
question, please.
Question.
Mr. Berman, my hand was up, sir.
Yes,
Surges.
Mr. Surges.
This is one of those votes, Jared, that I agree with you. We're going to walk away saying, I think we did what our constituents want, which was to not increase the taxes that we can control. But the reality is we are taking 16 million out of reserves. We have not pulled back spending. We have not gone line item for line item. We are taking the money out of reserves. This budget is unbalanced. And so, well, we're going to call that vote and feel good for a minute. Then this afternoon, we're going to say, oh my gosh, what did we do? Or next year when we say, where's our reserve money? What did we do? And I just want to make sure that everybody's conscious of that. Taking it from reserves is not a healthy thing.
I have a question for Mr.
No.
Sanchez.
Can we call the question?
Yes, we'd like to call the question, but Ms.
I asked for the ayes and nays on calling the question.
Could I recognize Mr. Wallace, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to make a comment on that because as much as our board operates in a nonpartisan way, the reason that we're here today is because of the extreme partisanship that is going on in Springfield. And we are here because of an act that was passed that is forcing us to go $17.6 million beyond where we should be in additional expenses just to comply with an act that nobody really knows how it's going to work. Now, I'm going to vote in favor of doing this, as I believe the majority probably will, with the hope that the Safety Act is never fully implemented and the use of reserves and that we will not have a need to use $14 million in reserves. But if worse comes to worse, that's what we're going to have to do because I'm not going to pass it along to, I mean, we need to lead. We can't pass an expense like this along to taxpayers.
Okay,
Well
thank you.
said,
And I,
Tom.
I would like to call the question.
Okay. Motion was made by Berman, second by Bates. Okay, Ellen?
No, second by Leonard.
Oh, is Leonard? Okay, I'm sorry. We did change it.
And we have a question on the floor.
For just clarification, what we're voting on, so everybody. understands.
Okay, please.
Mr. Berman has
Mis-
that motion.
Mr. Berman, could you please clarify?
What is it?
Perhaps.
Voting on no tax increase, basically, but it's for a zero increase in our aggregate tax levy,
Very good. Is that,
A yes vote.
plus new construction. No tax increase,
For new growth.
only new construction of $566,000.
okay. Hold on a second. We have clarity here or just getting something, Mr. Onsick? Just getting something. Very good.
This,
Okay. Without the 5%.
I think,
Beats
the other
all.
thing is that
Was that-
this has to go, our executive finance director is directed to prepare a revised draft for our budget reflecting what we're agreeing to today. So we will then, as a board, move on this at some other later time.
This is a recommendation to the finance committee and it
Recommendation.
has to still go through the process. So I think we're ready. Clerk, please call the roll.
Okay, Ellen,
Ellen, aye.
Bates,
Yes.
Berman,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Davis,
Davis, yes.
Ford,
Or yes.
Fraz, Gums. Iqbal,
Yes.
Kenyon, okay. Caius,
Yes.
Hopi, Leonard,
Leonard, yes.
okay. Can I have you, but yes, no. Okay, Leonard, Liz, all
Leonard, yes.
right.
Okay.
Lewis,
No.
Lewis is no.
Oh, wait, no,
Martin?
no. Lewis is no taxes, yes. Yes, no taxes. Sorry.
So yours is a?
I'm a yes.
Yes.
Sorry.
Martin,
Martin, yes.
Molina,
Molina, yes.
Sanchez,
Sanchez, yes.
Shepro,
Shepro, yes.
Silva,
Silva, yes.
Strathman, did you- Thank you. Ms. Strathman, did you arrive? Okay, no vote. Surges,
Surges, yes.
Tepe, Wallace,
Wallace, yes.
Winnicky.
Yes.
It passes with one nay.
Very good.
my vote, Opie.
Okay,
Mr. Copey.
A yes vote is a yes for raising taxes and a no is a no for raising
No.
taxes.
Oh, just the opposite,
The
sir.
opposite.
Just the opposite.
Okay, my vote's opposite then, sorry.
Okay.
so your vote is a yes, correct?
My vote is a yes, no raising taxes.
Thank you.
All righty. Very good. Thank you, Mr.
Okay,
Copey.
unanimous.
Thank you very much.
Yes, Ms. Winnicky.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. So when does Finance Committee meet?
The
So
fin-
this is going to be discussed there again.
Yes.
And then after it goes through finance, it goes through the next county board
It-
meeting?
No, there's one more step. We have to obey the county code, which is guided by state statute. So it goes to finance for recommendation.
Okay.
We recommended to finance what the
Correct.
decision is. We only did that because of the new growth. We had to decide whether or not we needed to have the tax hearing. So since that is no longer needed, we don't have to have a tax hearing. This is the recommendation by the board to the finance committee. The finance committee will give it its blessing
Um,
or change.
And we're done.
And well, we're not done. It has to go to executive committee, which has the full authority to bring this tax recommendation, this budget recommendation, because there still can be changes on it. Or the board is going to meet on November 7th for that vote, so it could be publicly displayed.
So it's
Your
not
final
on.
vote will happen, ladies and gentlemen, on November 22nd.
So it's not fine.
Yes, sir.
I have a procedural question.
Mhm.
If the committee structure is such that the committees ultimately make recommendation to the board and the board takes final action. Today, did we not take final action on
Exactly.
on the 5%?
That I will leave that to our state's attorney.
Exactly.
What you did today is determine the estimated amount of taxes necessary for next year. So that is a requirement on a couple different provisions of the statute, but this is under the truth and taxation portion of the statute. And then that sort of sets everything else in motion. If you had voted to do the 5% plus new construction, that would have then required a truth and taxation hearing. Because you did not do that, no truth and taxation hearing is required. So this was just a determination of the estimated amount of taxes necessary for next year.
Okay.
And it still has to go through the process.
Question for state's attorney.
Yes, sir. Mr.
Yeah.
Shepro.
If I heard Mr. Armstrong correctly, theoretically, the board could vote later for in excess of the 5%, but then the clerk would be required to reduce it to an amount that would be compliant with the not having held the hearing, which would be 5% without new growth.
That would be correct. I mean, you would have the option after the board changed their mind to hold the truth and taxation hearing. The notice, however, for that truth and taxation hearing must occur between 7 and 14 days prior to the hearing. So you would have to calculate that into the schedule, overall schedule for adopting the budget and the tax levy.
And it is my strong belief that this is the board's vote, this board's vote, not the new board. So this board should make that final determination. I would like to remind the board that this whole tax conversation, financial conversation came at your request. You asked me early on this year that you'd like to get more involved with the budget. During that period of time, we've had robust and sometimes very lively conversations about what our tax levies look like, what our expenses look like. And I hope you've had an opportunity to feel invested in the decision that you're ultimately going to be making. The next step, however, as has been duly noted by many of us, and it has been requested by myself several meetings ago, is that up to the new board, and I will challenge this new board, I'll give them December, but starting in January, I'm going to ask each one of them who are appointed to a committee to go to their department heads or their other elected official to start looking at efficiencies and possibly recommendation on how they could reduce the amount of their own spending. This is an important challenge we all have to face because we realize that money is a valuable asset, very hard to earn, very easily spent. Yes, sir.
Berman here. I want to point out that that reduction would have to equal the $16 million that we withdrew from our reserves
Yeah. No.
All right, let's not go
to
through
balance
that.
the budget and next,
Let's start and we will deal with that when the new board is seated. No, we're not going to be absurd and we're not going to call names, but we are going to be doing carefully looked at it. And I warn the board members who are going to win their elections and the new board members who'll be seated that this is going to be their very first challenge. So please make sure that everyone has their sleeves rolled up and their pencils out and having good common sense behind them. So with that, Mr. Kenyon, please.
It's another bright day in Kane County. I move we adjourn and go into the sunshine.
Thank you, sir. Second. All in favor?